And so, break check week, capacity tightening. What's happening today on the Logistics Life? Hey, everybody, welcome back. And we got another data day with our main man, Dean. Dean, break check last week. So tell us what happened and what you see. And we got some interesting, I think, some very great news on the horizon, I think. What are you looking at?
Well, we've had this lingering capacity that's been in the market for, it feels like forever, but it's actually more like the last 27 months, 28 months, we've been through this market where we've just had too many trucks. And I know that's
feels like the last 228 months, to be honest.
Yeah,
with you.
I know.
Crazy.
And the numbers, I just looked at the numbers on the weekend, and carriers, this is really strange because carriers still took time off in really high numbers last week during break check week. Now, normally when things are bad and slow and rates aren't good, carriers stay out there and keep working. That's not the case at the moment, and that kind of confounds a lot of people, and I have a reason why that's the case. But if you think about since January, so go back to the pandemic when PPP loans ended in June of 2020 to today, we've gained 450,000 carrier authorities, right? So this isn't trucks, this is just authorities, 450,000. Remember, it almost doubled in an 18-month period. So we've gained 450,000. We've lost 390,000 over the same period. June 20 to today.
So we're at 60.
That leaves 61,000 still remaining, or 13% of those that joined are still have active authorities. Now, I don't know how active, but they're active authorities in the business. So, give that a haircut and take out a few thousand for carriers that shouldn't be there, that aren't there, that are fraudulent. You've still got a lot of capacity sitting in the market.
Or ones that just keep their authorities, right? I've had a few conversations with people lately where the whole buying MCs is becoming a big thing now, right? Yeah. Okay.
And it's getting harder though to get into our load board though if you're one of those carriers, right? So you've got to be able to provide evidence that you're a legitimate carrier in interstate commerce. So we're finding ways to weed these people out. Even if you take some of those out, Dan, you still got a lot of carriers just out there hauling, turning and burning, trying to make money. And then though, what you see in the last couple of months, I'll pull up the data now. So for the longest time, if you remember, we measured the net change of carriers that enter and carriers that leave. And that kind of moves the needle, right? So only 3% of the carriers last month changed their status. So it meant 97% of the carrier authorities out there didn't change their operating status. They just kept, operating the way they were. 3% either reactivated, were new, or revoked their authority. What we're seeing in June and July is another acceleration of carriers leaving the industry. For the longest time, since October 2022, when carriers started to leave in pretty big numbers, we were averaging about 7,000 to 7,500 carrier exits a month. Last month, it was 11,000. Right?
Oh, wow.
Exited the industry. Did it drop? Exited the industry.
Wow. That number is astronomical compared to the last couple of months.
So it's accelerating. So the number of carriers leaving the industry is accelerated in June and July and into August.
And do you think this is like them running out of that runway that you were talking about a while ago? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think it's a couple of things. It's a soft freight market over the summer. Rates were heading up. If you remember, over the summer, rates did start to tick up a little bit. I think that gave carriers a sense that maybe the market was turning. But once things started to soften again after July 4, the wheels fell off. And then, of course, you get to the end of June and you've got quarterly tax payments. You've got all the sort of the big cash flow crunches that come along from a financing perspective. So the numbers Yeah, we had 11,300 leave. I just looked at the final numbers for August. 8,300 in July and 7,400 in May and June. So we've accelerated up to 11,500. At its worst, Dan, that's almost as bad as January 2023 was the highest number of carrier exits. January 2023. Right, so that's when we saw the market really start to lose capacity in the spot market.
And that was actually, would you, if I can just interrupt you for a second, because that's an interesting number. Would you think that would be a lot of the exit in January 2023? Would that be a lot of the carriers that came in and said, okay, we made our money, we know it's about to get really bad, we got to jump out? Or what would you?
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there was a few things going on. Now that was before, so that was at the end of the summer of high diesel prices after Russia invaded the Ukraine, and that market started to really tank. And you get to the end of the year after the peak season, and the first quarter is always pretty bad. So I think there'd be a lot of carriers that said, yeah, we got through the busy season in 2022, we made some money, now's the time to get out. So that's generally what we saw happening in the market.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Here's why these numbers are important, because you know how contract rates still follow the spot market.
Yes.
By about 4 to 6 months, right? So here's why this is important. Right now, and I'll pull up the numbers, replacement rates for recent RFPs coming into routing guides. So these are new rates used on a lane for the very first time, are coming in 3% lower now. So on our call a few weeks ago, it was 1% lower. And we were thinking they were going to get to parity, where replacement rates from recent RFPs were matching the rate negotiated last year. Well, they've started to widen again. They've started to accelerate, as in contract rates have started to drop now. Now, for context, it was 12 to 15% down for the best part of last year and early this year. This year, it's gone into single digits. It was getting close to zero or parity, where we were seeing replacement rates brand new in routing guides on a lane match last year's rates, which gave us a sense that the market was turning. Well, now they've started to widen and get bigger, even worse for refrigerated. Refrigerated replacement rates, Dan, are coming in 6% lower. So it looks like the market is starting to soften again. And capacity starting to leave in fairly significant numbers. Now, what does that mean for rates? So when you look at our forecast, we are seeing spot rates start to go up, right, as the market softens. So why do spot rates go up when the market softens like this and carriers leave? Well, as carriers leave, capacity starts to tighten in the market that's the spot market. Now, it's only 18% of loads move in the spot market, but if all of your capacity is leaving in the spot market, it has a much bigger effect on the spot market. And I'll give you some examples, right? So if spot is only, let's say it's 15% of the market. If you've got a 2% reduction in capacity and it's all in the spot market, it's actually a 13 to 14% reduction in capacity in the spot market, right?
Which is significant when you look at it, yeah.
Because it's only 15% of the market. So, and that's why I track the spot market movement the most. And I'll back that statement up with my data that we track, the DOT numbers. 94% of carriers that leave have less than 10 power units. 70% are owner operators. Right, so 90% have less than 10 trucks of the carriers exiting. So it's not the large mega fleets, it's the small fleets that are coming and going. Of the carriers that enter, 93% have 1 to 3 power units. Right, so the carriers coming and going in the spot market are the really small carriers, which shouldn't be a surprise. That's how the market works. They represent the bulk. But if that's where your flexible, agile, nimble carrier is coming and going, that's what moves the rate needle the most in the spot market, because as I said, if you lose 2% of your total capacity in the market, if it's all in the spot market, it's a 14% drop in capacity in the spot market itself. And that's why you see the rate volatility around brake check week, which is where we started the show, because, and I'll pull up the numbers, Dan, because we surmised the week before that brake check week would in fact result in a decrease in capacity.
Yep.
The number of trucks that, and here's the numbers. So what we saw was a 9% decrease in equipment posts. So if you track equipment posts every week, this is where a carrier is looking for a load and they post their truck on our load board. So it's called an equipment post. They don't have a load and they're looking for a load. So they post their equipment. It's a really good sign of capacity, sitting in the market. And what we see is you go along, you saw it in road check week back in May. In road check week, I think it was in the order of 11%. This week it was 9%. So what I'm saying is, compared to the week prior, which was a normal, trucking week without public holidays, 9% fewer carriers posted their trucks for loads last week. And I've gone back 8-9 years and looked at brake check week and road check week, and what you see is this observable decrease in carriers posting their trucks for loads. So the extrapolation of that is they're taking time off during brake check week, which was something Dave Nemo from Radio Nemo pointed out to everybody decades ago. It's not my idea, but I've been tracking it ever since. The 8-year average, Dan, is about 6%. Last week it was 9% fewer carriers took time off. And the other thing that's worth pointing out is refrigerated carriers, it was 11%. They always take much more time off during brake check week, at about double the long-term average. So reefer carriers, so dry van 9%, reefer carriers down 11, flatbed down 8, for a market average of 9% fewer equipment posts. And that's a little bit higher than the 8-year average. So this is not sort of, it's just 1 week out of the year. It's actually a very noticeable week, because during brake check week, road check week, any of these weeks where the CVSA is out doing their, 72-hour blitz, carriers take time off. And normally, here's how it works. In really good years, you normally see carriers stay out there and turn and burn because they're making money. So if you look at the numbers, so if it was 9% this year, 2020, 2021, 2022, and into 2023, 1%, 4%, 2%, 2%. Hardly any carriers took time off in those heady days of making money, right?
They'll deal with the brake check week and just to make the money.
Yeah. And if you go back to 2019, similar thing. So you'd say, well, why did carriers take time off last week if rates are so bad? And this gets to what you and I talked about called latent capacity, where we've now got this growing number of carriers who've made so much money in the pandemic, they can afford to pick and choose when they run. And that is, it's sort of this opportunistic capacity that's coming in and out of the market on a daily basis. And they can haul freight for lower rates, because when you take out finance costs, you take out 31 cents a mile out of your operating costs, right? So if it costs $1.80 to run a long haul truck down the road, you could do it for $1.50 if you socked away money and paid off your truck and trailer.
So I have a question for you, Dean. What you said 2019. So what was the number in 2019 for brake check week? Because 2019 was that year when there was mass exodus. I mean, I think Celadon went out of business that year. There was a massive amount because of the 2018 and then the drop in rates, but the hike in fuel. Because I would think this year would be somewhat of a 2019 in retrospect. I mean, there was obviously variations with so 4% as opposed to 9.
Yeah.
So it's an even worse time off then. And how many carriers went out of business in 2019?
I don't have the exact number. We just know in that second quarter, there was a record number of bankruptcies. We've not seen a year since that.
So even the ones now really that we're talking about, like even the exodus now that we're talking about doesn't match 2019. That's probably, you're right, because of the COVID, because of banking money away, and then also fuel's been staying relatively low, right?
Right. And we haven't seen, compared to 2019, the level of large fleets exiting the market. Like notwithstanding Pride and some of the other fleets that have gone out, we're not seeing mega carriers, New England Motor Freight, Celadon, all those big carriers that went out that really affected capacity in a meaningful way. So that's why you see carriers take time off in weeks like this. We kind of predicted this would happen this year. And what happened is exactly that. Capacity tightened. It happened at the end of the month, end of quarter, Labor Day short week. Shippers trying to move freight, and of course, there's these carriers that take time off because they can afford to. It's really counterintuitive that if rates are so bad, and this is the argument I have with truckers, not a literal argument, but a discussion. They will always say rates aren't good, rates are bad. Even when they're good, they say they're bad, right? So you can never really win when it comes to talking about rates in the freight market. And the typical feedback is, yeah, rates are low, but if they're so low, how come carriers take time off? It's because they can afford to. So they're actually doing this. And if you say, well, okay, how do the numbers pan out? Well, if we had 11,300 carriers join, we had leave in August. If we had 11,300 leave in August, we had 9,500 join the market. So what are they looking at? Well, lower truck prices, and rates aren't horrible. Dan, if you're getting a fuel surcharge and rates are around $2 a mile for dry van, you can still make pretty good money in this market. So I think what we're seeing is the tail end of the carriers that joined during the pandemic running out of money, higher operating costs. This is my working theory. And then you're seeing this new cohort of carriers come in that are seeing opportunity in the market. And what that means is that as demand goes up and down with seasonality, this opportunistic capacity comes in and out of the market to keep a lid on things. Right? So rates aren't going to go through the roof because capacity exited. They don't, that's not how it works. It takes a significant demand trigger. So as demand sort of improves around Thanksgiving or, some of the big holiday events, capacity will come off the sidelines and haul the freight for a better rate, and then they'll take time off. And that's what I'm seeing in the market this time around is you've got a bit of, and I think this is more the lower 48. I can't speak for the Canadian market because I think you've got a much worse capacity problem there. You've got a much higher level of surplus capacity in your market, offset by lower manufacturing numbers. I think that's what's going on up there.
Yeah, and it's I'm going to call it compartmentalized. I was trying to make up a word there, Dean, and I didn't get it fast.
You got it.
But it's like especially in some areas. So I was talking to some people last week. And we were just talking about general freight rates, and the Toronto-Montreal corridor is going at people are offering an absolutely ridiculous number for that lane. And a lot of people, I'm talking to my neighbor who drives for a company, he does the Toronto-Montreal corridor. He's been off more this summer than he's been off he told me, like 6 years. Just things not working, not happening. And then all of a sudden when CNCP came in, he was busier than our one-arm paper hanger. He was being asked to do doubles and like stay on. Can you do like 6 days this week instead of 4? And did it like because everybody obviously pulled their stuff off rail. And the Toronto-Montreal corridor for rail is huge as well. Right, because a lot of carriers, they'll just have local P&D in Toronto, and they'll have local P&D in Montreal, or maybe an office in Montreal. But instead of sending drivers back and forth, they rail it back and forth every night. They just drive the trailers right onto the flat cars, and they're done. So there was a lot of that. And then the Western corridor, obviously, we saw the spike. But he's it's challenging in the Canadian market. And, this is nothing new though in the Canadian market, Dean. I mean, gosh, I remember back in 2003, when I first joined an asset side in the Canadian market, the whole Toronto outbound, like whole GTA outbound, has always been saturated. Always. Like one of the biggest things most Eastern Canadian carriers talk about is the outbound. Actually, no, I'm going to say probably even Western carriers. The biggest challenge is outbound. You go on to, I mean, you'll probably have it in your DAT load board. If you look at the amount of loads or the amount of equipment posted versus loads posted, I can bet, I haven't looked at a load board in years, but I can bet there's going to be a huge variation there. Huge. It just seems like every 10 feet in especially at like the Dixie 401 area, every 10 feet there's a trucking company. I mean, I'm driving over country roads over the last little bit, like northern country roads, and there's massive carriers with sub yards everywhere. Like Brian Kurtz, and I mean it's crazy how and I mean, maybe I haven't been driving around lately, you know what I mean? So things change. Obviously, people move, companies move. A lot of companies are moving more west into the, Milton. This has been happening for years, though, into the Milton, Cambridge area because it was cheaper to buy land. Still on the 400 series highway, you know what I mean? But I mean, it was interesting. So yesterday I left Cambridge, and it's normally like a 45-minute drive to my house. And I put on my maps, and it was taking me via the 401, and it was an hour and 20 minutes. So, and I'm sitting there going, no, that doesn't make sense. But I guess because of the way I had, it wasn't Waze, it was just maps. Anyways, I started driving where I would normally drive. And when I went to the country roads, it automatically shaved 40 minutes off my drive. It was crazy. Wow. It was crazy. And but this is what it is when it comes to the 400 series highways, like the 401. Somebody farts the wrong way 3 miles down the road, and like it's a traffic jam for 3 hours. It's crazy. And then it's funny because when you get up to where where you think it might have happened, there's nothing there.
Nothing there. Well, traffic has memory. I was just pulling up the Toronto data. It's 1,700 loads, 1,000 trucks. That's a lot. It's a lot of trucks searching for loads up there. That's in that market. So the capacity is very loose right now in Toronto. That's always the case there.
Always.
Dan, the markets that are hot are anywhere where there's big distribution markets, like some big warehouse distribution markets. Columbus, Joliet, Chicago, Dallas, Fort Worth, Atlanta, Los Angeles. So because of this surge of imports that's come in, and I think we're at the peak. August will probably be another big month, but then it'll calm down. All of that freight's got to move. And the other thing I learned yesterday, we're talking to JOC about it, but what's driving up rates out of the West Coast, and this is worth thinking about, even though the market's soft, regionally, there's still some pretty hot markets for the carriers and brokers. And here's what's happening. Because of the extra transit time of ocean ships, big ocean container ships around the Cape of, is it the Cape of Good Hope? The Horn of Africa, they call it.
Where the Houthis
that
are.
Extra 10, because of the Red Sea crisis, that extra 10 to 12 days has ended up creating an imbalance in the movement of empty containers back in Asia. So there's a shortage of containers back in Asia in peak season. So what's happening on the West Coast is the ocean carriers are driving up the rates for any international movement inland, the IPI, the inland point intermodal, I think they call it the IPI move, where a 40-foot or a 20 comes into Los Angeles and then goes on a train to Chicago. But at some point, they've got to get that 20-foot and the 40-foot empty hauled back to Los Angeles, put on a ship, 3 weeks back to Asia, right? What they're doing is they don't want the 20s and 40s put on a train in Los Angeles or Seattle. They want it transloaded. So the way they encourage people to transload into a 53-foot intermodal or a truck is they drive up the rates for the rail move. That's what's happening right now, because they need the containers to be emptied in Los Angeles to go straight back to Asia. So what's happening is truckload rates. So this is a really complex situation, but truckload rates are really high and higher than normal coming out of Los Angeles right now. So even though the market's flat and we talk about national average rates, there are some markets where capacity is really, really tight and rates are going up much higher than you would think. because of things not related to the trucking industry or freight demand, but something that's happening outside of our industry. It's a really interesting correlation between rate movement and these sort of
I'm going to have to ask a few
geographic
people and see if
anomalies.
that's happening on the west coast of Canada as well, because that's obviously, just like LA and Seattle, that's a main, BC, Delta Port and stuff are huge import for ocean from Asia, right? So I'll have to ask some people, because that's very interesting, because I know this happened during the pandemic when there was a huge amount of and hence the reason why warehouses in LA and stuff were bursting at the seams. And I think Prologix wanted another 1 billion square feet that they could have filled up.
Right.
And I do know also,
Phoenix, sir.
That's what I was just about to say. They were going to Phoenix, delivering and then coming back, which was a shorter distance than, say, going to Florida or even Tennessee and stuff to unload. That's interesting. We'll have to keep tracking that.
Well, think about that Phoenix, right? Because it's where the land was and where they built a lot of those warehouses. The Inland Empire was kind of already, space was at a premium. So any warehouse development that was tangentially related to Los Angeles imports was going to happen in Phoenix for the most part. Truckload volumes, Los Angeles, Phoenix, are up 34% compared to this time last year. These are loads being moved on that 423-mile run, I think it is. Rates are up 21 cents a mile on that lane.
And you think this has to do with the fact that they want containers back in Asia ASAP, so they're doing less distance. So they're unloading, transloading, and getting it done. Yeah,
or just taking the 40-foot straight to Phoenix, unloading it, and bringing it straight back.
Yes,
in the same in the 24-hour period. So that could be what's happening there. But we're seeing much higher volumes move into that market, which has become a real distribution market. And then we're seeing the same out of any of the other distribution markets that you'd like to point to. If I go to Columbus, so we're seeing a lot of.
Can I ask you a question, Dean, before we get into that? Because something just opened up in my brain here, and I'm wondering from a salesperson perspective, anyone watching or listening to this, do you think most of the movement for the next little while is going to be regional as opposed to like, obviously all of Canada or all of US or North America? And how do you see that regional shift? Like what would somebody, if they were watching right now, saying, okay, I see that, what tools or what systems can we utilize to kind of pay attention to regional shift?
So, I mean, our MCI is going to give you the best read of where brokers are struggling to find trucks, because there'll be over posting going on. So your number of load posts goes up, and the harder it is to find capacity, so the more brokers will post loads or the same load to try and get carriers enticed to get under the load. So that's one way to watch it. I think you've got to pull back a little bit and say, if it's a distribution market and it's got warehouses situated within a day's drive of any of the major capital cities, you're going to see tight capacity right now. Going back to where we started the show, if you've got 11,000 carriers leaving the industry and not as many joining, you are going to see tightness in capacity, because there's just not going to be as many trucks to handle that surge volume. Right, so you on a particular lane like Allentown, the big lane that services the Northeast is Allentown. Allentown has got a third of the US population within 500 miles of it. And that's why when you go through Allentown, you see nothing but warehouses all the way through Harrisburg, Mechanicsburg, Allentown. All of those markets are just full of warehouses. And they're all situated so they can have next day, same day delivery to Washington, Philly, Baltimore, New York City, Boston. Right,
and Canada.
So and Canada, of course. So what you'll see is any of those regional lanes where there are big distribution markets fulfilling e-commerce, you're going to see very tight capacity, because when the volumes sort of surge around a Black Friday event or a Thanksgiving, you're going to see fewer trucks. But even if you pull back even further, if the number of trucks exiting the market are still increasing, that means that whenever you get to this point in the market where it's trying to find equilibrium, you haven't got as much capacity for any of the surges that might happen on a day of the week basis, like a Friday, or around a major event or a public holiday event. So that's what I think you've got to watch is The MCI will be a really good indicator, but then so will the 3-day rate. So your 3-day rate is a really good indicator of what's happening right now. Now, my 3-day rate for Toronto to Montreal, I've still got a bit of weekend noise in the data, but my 3-day rate, Dan, is lower than my 7-day rate. So that tells me that market's cooling. It's averaging $1.95. My 7-day rate is $2.15. So my 7-day rate has gone up 12 cents a mile since August because of the rail strike, right? So there was some lift there, but it's exactly where it was this time last year. So I would say to you, my read of the rate view, 7-day, 3-day rate is that market's cooling down. It's starting to stabilize. Your 3-day rate is a really good read. Now, when I get to Thursday, my 3-day rate becomes really valid because it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday loads. Right, my 7-day rate always includes a weekend, and there's a bit of noise in the data there. So you've always got to think about. And now, unless you've got a lane with high volume, you don't normally get a 3-day rate. There's not enough loads being reported by shippers and carriers. So we had 21 reports, and my 3-day rate has got 21 reports from 10 companies so far on that. So that meets the criteria.
That's a good variation. Yeah, that's a good variation, especially 21 from 10, because it's not all one company that might have a really, really good rate going or something. You know what I mean? It might have a very
So MCI
is coming up then, Dean. Like, if you had I mean, obviously, I know you don't have a crystal. Well, sometimes I think you do have a crystal ball, actually, now that I think about it. What do you see happening over the next, call it like 30, 60 days till Thanksgiving?
I'm going to say rates are going to be flat. I'm just going to pull up my forecast for this week. My dry van forecast has rates going through to 10.4, so the 4th of October. Now, I think the 4th of October, I'm seeing rates up 4 cents a mile. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the 4th of October is going to be almost 3 weeks out from. No, not quite. So what we're seeing, to answer your question specifically, I would say rates are going to be flat to up slightly because capacity is leaving the spot market through to about the start of November, and then you're going to see rates start to rise like they always do in the lead up to Thanksgiving. So from about 3 weeks out from Thanksgiving, 4 weeks out, you want to start thinking about making sure you've got capacity on any of those lanes that move high volume of freight related to, is it Cyber Monday?
Cyber Monday and Black Friday and then Cyber Monday and
all of those. So that's all shippers are going to position that into markets well in advance. Anything you want to move out of the Pacific Northwest, you're going to have to lock in capacity now. Start thinking about capacity because you're heading into fall. We're in meteorological fall now. But you're going to head into Christmas tree season. 3 weeks out from Thanksgiving, Christmas trees will be moving to, for wreaths and to Hawaii. So you're going to start to see Christmas trees intersect with fall produce in the Pacific Northwest. So that's an area where you've really got to pay attention to. Rates will go up there substantially. And then any of those fall produce markets across the top tier of the country, you're going to see tight capacity around those fall produce items of, apples and pears and products like that. So I think rates flat for the next 3 to 4 weeks is how I'm seeing it. But then they're going to start to climb, and then they'll drop off a little bit after Thanksgiving, and then they'll heat up again in the lead up to Christmas. So that's normally how the seasonality works.